Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here in time. I would like to welcome you to our final day of this CLEC 2019. I would like also to express my sincere thanks to the organizers for the outstanding and excellently organized gala dinner yesterday evening. For those who have participated, I think you all will agree that that was a very nice get-together in a very nice and typical Moroccan environment. But now today we will continue to discuss and highlight other important aspects which are connected to the establishment and the consolidation of space programs and the space sector in general in emerging countries. And the first session of this day will focus on space industry development and support. And this session will be moderated by Ms. Cami Brun. She is the head of global business development at China Head Aerospace Group. She has been setting up the European subsidiary of the group in Paris, and she is now the general manager of Head Aerospace in France. And I would like to ask you to give her a round of applause to start her moderation.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, thank you IAF for the organization of the event, and also thank you CRTS to host the conference today in this beautiful country. Thank you all of you to be here this morning. The panel will focus on the space industry development and support. We'd like to invite you to assist this panel, and we are inviting our keynote speaker, Professor Pascal Ehrenfreund, Chair and the Executive Board of DAR, on the stage for the keynote speech. Thank you so much.
Okay, all set. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The last day of a really exciting conference, and I hope you have a lot of energy because there are still some panels and also important topics. So I'm not sure if I can click the next one, but I just try. Okay, this one? Installation, yeah, that's always very important. So I think we had a very interesting sessions today. It will be industry and it will be legal issues. And I'm just going to give you a few slides in order to summarize a little bit what we discussed, but also introducing more or less the panel. And yeah, here we go. So I click here and not here. Sorry. So I think we discussed a lot about many of those issues which are listed here, that space applications are really, really very important. And there are so many space applications and they are growing with new business models. And we have discussed some of them, be it logistics, navigation, agriculture was a very important topic in some of the sessions for emerging countries. And there will be more. So the space sector is extremely dynamic, and with new companies, business models, and cross-sector applications, you will really see this field growing, and I will come back to that later. I think what we have discussed, in particular also of emerging countries, and what is of course globally important, is that space applications are really vital for solutions for the societal challenges, and that in a global dimension. And Earth observations, they are pivotal in order to solve some of the societal challenges. And we have discussed many of those topics, but I show you some of those figures again, what you can all really see and then investigate and research with Earth observations, be it the glacier melting, be it looking at the mobility, network traffic, looking at disaster management, and even urbanization. So this is something you can monitor. You can also monitor all those developments in over many decades, because you have those Earth observation data archived, and you can actually make extrapolations from the future how things will develop. And I just want to show you one example where the research organizations work really in perfect harmony with industry. These are our two satellites, Tandem X and Terrasar X, which flew in tandem in order to measure many aspects of the Earth's surface. This is a public-private partnership together with Airbus, and unfortunately the videos, one of the videos works, and these are radar satellites which can observe, through clouds and through day and night, and we have built together with industry a digital elevation model of the entire Earth's surface. And those data, of course, what a research organization like DLR is doing is using that in order to research and to provide data products, global data products. Like, for instance, we made a map of entire forest and non-forest of the entire Earth surface, but also the global urban footprint, which you can see here slowly moving. This shows you how in many decades actually urbanization advances across over the world, and how megacities are formed. And those global data products are crucial for science, but they are also crucial in order for industry, in order to sell this data, and that they can be applied to many different topics all over the world. So this kind of public-private partnerships are something which is very important. And another field where this, for emerging countries, is disaster management. This is a map just to show you how, just for the year 2017, how many events have occurred of disasters, be it fire, be it floods, be it earthquakes, and how often, that with this Charter of Space and Major Disasters, you have, of course, a lot of calls where a lot of countries help. DLR, of course, has a Center for Disaster Management where it actually helps in these occasions. And what you can see is that most of the events for disaster is actually are hydrological events. You can see that. I hope I can point it here. So wherever you look, be it Africa, be it Southeast Asia, be it South America, the dominant disasters are hydrological events. And you see that this is a map of 1 year, and not every year is the same, of course, but you have really to be, because it's in particular also in the area where many emerging countries are situated, you have really to be ready, not only to help, but also to develop technologies with industry in order to be ready in order to step in. And there's a lot of technology development which is necessary, And these are just some of the examples. Satellite-based monitoring is one, we have discussed that, but there's also unmanned aerial vehicles, there's a lot of robotics, and of course AI and machine learning and looking at data in order to do prognosis. And this is an area which I think is very important to develop these technologies, and also companies and industry in emerging countries. So I want to very fast go over something which we have discussed already this week a lot. But to summarize, the global space economy is valued around 350 million. There are some little, in the studies, some differences between 340 and 380 million, but roughly 350 billion, sorry. And there is a growth, an average growth of about 7% annual growth per year during the last decade. The year 2018 was especially important, and you see that we have advanced space technologies. We have unprecedented entrepreneurial leadership, which is dominantly, of course, happening in the United States, but it is slowly developing. And you have a lot of private investment. And when you look at the predictions, there are predictions that you are going to 1 trillion in the global space economy by 2040. And there are many different studies which are currently out there. And you wonder, where are the new markets? And a lot of people think that it will need also the commercial market in a human spaceflight in order really to reach this 1 trillion dollar space economy. And there must be a lot of disruptive downstream applications which are necessary in order to reach this and to keep this space economy alive. So we are all very euphoric, but I think everybody has also really to work towards this goal. There are also prognoses that it will not be that high. The driver in all that cases, of course, is technological innovations. And when you look at the space equity investment, this is really 2018 has been an all-time high. This is an overview about the last 10 years, and you see that it tallied to about $18 billion in the last 10 years, and just in the year of 2018, actually the space investment was about $3 billion. These are actually data which Space Angels publish and of course augment that. And you see that there are many, many companies which have been funded. Many more companies are funded. In this case now in 2018, more than 400. And with the new business models and with new interesting areas, obviously there is also the risk. It gets lower, so Space Angels or in investment companies are just more prone in order to invest also in a space economy. And you have also about over 500 venture capital firms that have invested in space in the last 10 years. And again, in the last year, there was a really all-time high with over 100 companies which are ever placed investments for the first time. So it will probably not continue as steep like it did in 2018, but it is something which I think every country, be it of course, a space country or be it emerging countries, have to think about what kind of business models are important for the future and how do they match to the needs I have in my own country. And this is a small overview about current and future new space business fields. When you look at the very traditional fields of navigation and military space activities and also science, and when we are coming to the new space area, how many different ideas are actually brought up, and we are just at the beginning. And that also triggers the future investment. And again, when you look here, we have started space tourism actually in 2018, and we have a 3D printer on the International Space Station, which works with about serials right now, printing happily ever after. So there are so many ideas. When you look at commercial human spaceflight, you can think, of course, in on-orbit manufacturing, on habitats, on so many new ideas that business models, when this, I would say, the space economy develops like that, I think there will be many, many new ideas which we are not currently not thinking of. And one of them is, for instance, energy in space. That is something which goes through the press. There are already ideas, but we're doing that already partly now, because this is one of our contributions to Morocco. We used Earth observation data in order to help for efficient power plant management. It means looking at areas where they are best situated and where they can work most efficiently. So there is a lot of connection and a lot of possibilities which we can use in the future. And I want to end by just giving some of the bullet points, because I'm sure there are a lot of experts in the panel which will go into detail. But starting up space and particular, looking at the industrial sector in a country which goes into space. R&D is always important, be it in academia and research organizations. From there you start with startups. And what is important everywhere, not only in emerging countries, is in order to build these innovation ecosystems. And we have discussed that in some of the panels. You have to be flexible and to have a lot of different models where you establish collaborations with private and public enterprises. And we have talked about incubators, and that technology transfer has to be, of course, enhanced. And what is important, in particular for emerging countries, is to develop the space-educated workforce of the future. And that is more or less an important ingredient in order to build up the industry together with support for R&D. And obviously for emerging countries, it is important to have cooperations and nationally, with international partners. Nationally, obviously, there are funding agencies, be it ministries, be it other organizations, which provide financial support to build up an industry. But also internationally, there are development agencies and other organizations and space agencies around the world which can provide funding opportunities and access to new technologies and data. And that is certainly something which is really important. And the strongest of all is probably intergovernmental on the political level, because with this kind of engagement, you have a lot of political attention and support. And you can also, with this program comes also capacity building. And I just want to end with this slide and say we are now in a phase where, space economy grows. We are enthusiastic. We see the possibilities in the future. We have to bridge much more with the non-space sector. But we are talking about the 2030 agenda and how to deliver and how to contribute to the sustainable development goals. But we have also to look beyond, even right now, because it takes a long time to develop all that. And there are many new ideas which actually come after the 2030 agenda, like the world in 2050, which have just an updated strategy. Everything is moving so fast, and particularly the digital economy, so that we have to think really far in advance what space all can do for us and how we build up space industries and knowledge also in the emerging countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pascal, for a keynote presentation. And I would like to invite all the panelists to the podium to join us for the panel. So first of all, thank you, IEF, to host this panel this morning. And thank you so much, IEF, to offer me this opportunity to moderate the section. I believe that my panel this morning is also a very good example of the IEF 3G diversity, actually, because have a look, we have 10 different nationalities of speaker coming from different corners of the world. Thank you all for you to come here from different places and far flights to here to join us this morning. Thank you so much first. And well, we have the representative from government, from the industry, from the university. Again, we also have nearly half of the panelists are women as well. This is also a good example of 3G diversity that I am supporting every year. So this morning, the topic that we would like to address is space industry development and support. Pascal already mentioned a little bit on the market figures that 350 billion of dollar of the market shares. But here I would like to quickly show you that in terms of satellite value chain, because we're going to discuss how the industry is going to develop. So have a look on the satellite market value chain. As today, the commercial turnover of the space market reached 271 billion in 2018, with 8% growth of CAGR. Have a look, which is very interesting, is the value chain. You have 30 companies in the manufacturing market, nearly 4 billion commercial market value, 10 companies in the launch market, 50 companies in the satellite operation. And if you look, it's a very fragmented market in the downstream and application market, reaching 5,000 companies and 251.7 billion market value. Which is very interesting is it actually indeed represent 98% of the industry market value. So, well, today we're all here to discuss emerging space for the country, how to develop the industry for this country. Well, today we would like to see with our panelists to discuss, but not maybe have time to discuss all the topics, but the core topic we'd like to see is emerging space country. Have a look on 2018, 12 commercial order for satellite ordering come from emerging space country, and which is very important is it represents 43% of the satellite ordering last year. It is a very recording year of last year. 43% is huge, and of course it's 70% of the global satellite manufacturing market, because it's probably in terms of the satellite value is lower because it's more size satellite, etc. So it's a record year for the emerging space country to enter in this industry market. Well, there are different questions we'd like to address. So how can emerging space country to develop space industry with economic, socio-economic benefits? When you develop a space program, space industry, where you go upstream or downstream? And also, are we going to build capacity building, or to procure with some time to transfer, or what is the role of the national policy space program? So I would like to leave the floor to our panelists that we are going to have a 5-minute presentation of each speaker, and then we'll have the panel discussion. So I believe that we're Friday on the last day. I believe that you are quite familiar with the system, that we have the application that you can ask your question, and also we also have election for the poll question. I will take that. So thank you everyone to be here. And I will have the first, our panelist, Ms. Kasia Cadworthy, Head of Customer Know-how Transfer and Training Program from Service Satellite Technology SSTL. Thank you so much.
I hope you can hear me well. I'm not sure how close to sit to this microphone. So thank you. This one? Is that better? No, it's fine. I think I'm fine. Thank you, Cami. My name is Kasia, and heading the know-how transfer programs at SSTL. Majority of you probably know who SSTL is, but for those who don't, I can remind that we are a small satellite manufacturer based in UK. We've been on the market for quite a while, from really early 80s, and the term small satellite actually comes from SSTL. So we were the first ones to use the components of the shells, which are obviously now used very widely, and it's a common knowledge that we can fly COTS components in space. When I say small satellites, I mean a microsatellite class, on average 50 to 100 kilos type of satellites. We've done smaller satellites, we've done bigger ones, but that's kind of on average. We've done a lot of projects with space emerging countries. Many of them, they've done their first satellite with SSTL, and quite a lot of them done the know-how transfer program with us. So that's very close to my heart, because that's what I'm occupying myself every day, is really the capacity building in those countries, and it's a capacity building in space engineering. So obviously not every country has to build satellites. That's quite obvious from all the discussions we had over the last 3 days. But for those who wish to, gain independence, sustainability, guarantee of the data coming to the end users, having own satellites is of benefit. And if you want to build a long-term program and industry, it's beneficial to transfer some of the technology and the knowledge to the people of your country, to then support the industry and take that manufacturing in your own hands. So you can be in charge of all the requirements of the satellites, how to put it together, to ensure the security, the independence of operations. Just to give you a flavor, we have done more than 20 know-how transfer programs over the last 3 decades. And in the region, we have worked with 2 Algerian satellites, 3 Nigerian satellites, a group from South Africa in the 90s. And just currently, we are working with more than 40 engineers from Thailand. So GISDA very much is focusing on bringing local industry into that endeavor. So what we will be doing, we will be looking at procuring local parts, local modules, local subsystems as much as we can to involve that in the build of our satellite. That satellite will be as well integrated and tested in country in the facilities that GISDA already has put together. How else we can support local industry, us as a company? The one thing that we do with our know-how transfer programs is provide licensing to technology. How is it possible? You may ask, because we are selling all the things that we accumulated over the 30 years. Basically, we design everything in-house. So all the subsystems, the payload, the onboard computer, the structure, the solar panels, everything is done at SSTL, and we own the rights to that technology. So we can then encapsulate all the mistakes that we've done over 30 years, all the great ideas that we had over that time, and bring that to an organization that wants to receive that kind of knowledge. So this is a boost of your technology. You don't have to start from scratch. And we heard yesterday some examples of that with UAE, who've done the transfer of technology with South Korea. Actually, we trained South Korean team in the early 90s as well. But this technology transfer enabled them to have a kind of stable, very safe technology base from which they boosted tremendously. So it is one of the approach for the industry if you want to develop, parts of the satellites or full satellites. It's one of the ways that you can get involved and improve your technology base. What I wanted to share with you is 3 observations that we had over that many programs we've done, and observations that enabled the space programs, the nations, to be more successful. So we've seen countries doing quite well, and we've seen countries stopping their space activities for various reasons. First of all, we heard it throughout 3 days, the investment in human capital is a key. So if you want to develop your industry is really the people. We heard that yesterday, people, people, people. And without the people, you don't have companies, you don't have ideas, you don't have investors, disseminate the information that you produce from satellites, you don't engage the users. So really, the academic training, exposure to hands-on experience is very important, to have that human base skillful to then become a capable industry. The keynote yesterday from International Space University mentioned a few times the minister's words from the opening ceremony. Don't take our engineers from us. Well, as a company, we don't want to take those engineers away, but how do you keep those engineers in country? They probably, want to pursue the careers they love. They want to work in space. And if your country doesn't give that opportunity, they will simply look elsewhere. So it's not like anybody's taking those engineers away. I think they just want to work in space. So my other message is, you have to build a long-term vision and a long-term program. So it's not just a single project that stops and nothing happens afterwards. Those engineers that you train, they will want to have a guarantee of a job, a role to play in the future. So really thinking long-term will allow them to stay in your country and feel satisfied. As well, from the point of industry, if they know that there is a long-term program in country, they can commit their resources, their investment into their products, whether it is services, whether it is, piece of equipment, a ground station. They know that there will be a customer in country, and that will enable them to gain experience, space heritage, and that again potentially will make them competitive on the international market. So having a national space program is kind of a propellant for the industry. How can you establish long-term space program? We've seen many countries doing different things, and what I noticed is if they have a technology base that provides good quality information and information that the end user wants, you get the end users hooked up. You have the government agencies wanting to utilize the data. So when the satellite the lifetime is over, they will want another satellite. So the key is to have this discussion in country to decide, what kind of information you need. I'm kind of biased thinking of satellites all the time and thinking especially about Earth observation. So from that point of view, imagery has to be of good quality. And it's not only a resolution that we're talking about. We're talking about, how often you can image your country. How big the image is. Can I map my whole province, or do I have to have hundreds of small images to cover a city? All those things make the users want to use the data. The quality is important, how well calibrated the imagery is. What is the geolocation, accuracy? So, it's no use having an image that is 200 meters or even kilometers sometimes away from the part. Yeah. So, to summarize, because I'm getting short on time, the 3 messages really that I wanted to show you is, invest in human capital, have a long-term vision, and look at high quality product that the end users can get accustomed to and used to ensure the duration of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the sharing. I think you can see in the application we have a question. I think, can you show on the screen for the speaker as well? So this question is, what are the successful criteria of a technology transfer program? So I think you have 4 answers: skills and experienced staff, sustainable and independent in the future. Well, you say, is it the first,
Yeah.
first one? Do you agree?
Yes, I was hoping to see the skills because that's what we really put a lot of effort in.
So perfect. Thank you so much for the audience to participate in this question as well. And so we have a second speaker. Thank you so much for being here. Her name is Miss Nofuneku Majaja, Chief Director, Space Affairs and Vice Chairperson of South African Council for Space Affairs, SACSA. Thank you so much, Mr. Ajay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Khum, for the introduction. Okay, thank you. As has been mentioned, I'm coming from the Department of Trade and Industry. I'll quickly share with you what this department is doing in South Africa. It's one of the national government departments. It's responsible for creating a conducive environment for investments in the country, for trade, such that the industry can grow and contribute to economic growth and create employment opportunities and reduce poverty. This department is responsible for creating a number of legislations and policies so that we can see orderly participation of commercial operations in the country. It is also facilitating investments, attracts investments, promotes international trade. It is as well responsible for broadening participation in the country. You may quite know that we're coming from a history of apartheid, so it becomes important that some government departments, actually all, do have some transformation programs in place. In this arena, we look at the creation of the special economic zones, where we attract a number of companies to come and set within that zone, where they will share resources, where they will coexist and actually share the knowledge and the technology. The department is also responsible for facilitating investment and technology that will be infused into the industry, as well as creating some specific skills that are required by the economy, because the South African community sort of lacks these specific skills. There's sort of a gap between what are the skills that are available and what the industry really requires. But now, coming into space, what is our responsibility pertaining to space, and what have we done in the past? South Africa has realized that the industry development is based on having a specific legislation and policy framework. So the policy and legislative framework tends to form a proper governance structure as a foundation for industry development. In this regard, South Africa, as Dr. Monsami mentioned yesterday, developed the National Space Policy in 2008, together with the National Space Strategy. Actually, this policy provides the guidelines on how all public and private sector participants should participate in the country. Is providing the overarching guidance for the development of appropriate space capabilities, because South Africa would like to see indigenous space capabilities being harnessed, being developed, and being nurtured to be more competitive and actually going into the international markets. The main principle of the policy talks to South Africa pursuing the space activities for socio-economic development. So that is the crux of the national space policy. Over and above the space policy South Africa in 1993, at the dawn of its democracy, it actually enacted a legislation called the South African Space Affairs Act, which established the South African Council for Space Affairs, which I'm actually serving on as the vice chair, as Kum has mentioned. This council actually serves as the regulatory body. It regulates all space-related matters in the country. It issues licenses for launching of space objects. It actually also maintains the international agreements, the treaties that the country is party to, and it also looking at dual-use technologies. However, we have realized lately that this legislation is a bit outdated. There's been a number of developments in the country. We have just mentioned about the policy of 2008, the strategy. There's the SANSA Act, which has established SANSA. So we needed to review this policy, and as a result, we embarked on a study to actually look at what is its relevance in this day and age. Over and above the national developments that I've spoken about, we have also seen developments in the international scene, developments from the UN corpus, a number of declarations and guidelines that have been developed that are pervasive, though non-binding. So many countries, including South Africa, are expected to actually comply and implement those guidelines. So we are in the process and actually finalizing the new legislation, which will be called South African Regulatory Legislation in the country. And I think in a year or two, we will be giving the audiences internationally more information about this. But now coming directly into the space industry, having laid this foundation of the governance structure, what do we see as the space industry in South Africa? Actually, I must say that within the space policy talks very strongly about developing the South African capabilities, the products and services. It also talking about the indigenous knowledge and indigenous a heritage that requires to be harnessed and nurtured so that it can be useful for today's industry and the future industry. Recently, within
Ms. Majolo, 1 minute.
The time. Recently, within South Africa, we have developed the South African Space Industry Framework, which is actually telling us about the great heritage that we have, but that requires a lot of upgrade and actually updating so that it can be of competitive level. We have also seen recommendations talking about looking at the downstream, not actually neglecting the upstream. I think the past 3 days we have been talking about downstream bringing a lot of opportunities to many economies. We are planning and actually also already having a number of financing instruments within the country and the DTI specifically to support the industry. We've got a couple of aerospace initiatives that are there to support the industry, to participate and compete globally. We've got programs that we have with the industry, with the research institutions that are there to support and facilitate innovation and technology development. We also have a couple of other programs that are there to promote commercialization. We have seen that it is important that we have financing instruments across the value chain, because we have realized that in the past there has been a sort of a gap between the R&D and taking the products and services to the market. And now we have commercialization incentives as well as transformation incentive to enhance broader participation and inclusion in the economic participation. I would, in conclusion, say that South Africa and the TI and all other departments are promoting international cooperation as part of one of the principles of South African policy. So as we are here today, we know that it's important that we cannot operate in isolation alone. We know that we have to link with a number of other countries, with a number of regions, and within that spirit of international cooperation, we would be able to move our industry far. Kum, I don't know whether you would want me, you're going to do the poll question.
Actually, the poll question is already online when you were speaking. So the question from your side is, how the space policies and regulations support space industry developments? So you got 47% for the first answer, define priorities for national space program. You have some comment on it?
I agree specifically with that response, that the space policies and regulations, I see it's also defining the industry development is moving as well. However, the definition of the national space program is still the majority. I agree fully well, but I would also say that it is important that we have these policies as they lay foundation that creates a conducive and a transparent environment for the industry. Actually, I would say all the four answers are very much important, as we can see that the definition of the industry development also is coming up at the 24%. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we move to another continent, from South Africa to China. One information is China celebrates the National Space Day 2 days ago at the same day as the opening of this event. So we are so glad to have Mr. Yuan Hongyi from China, General Manager, Hiring Group, Third Academy of Kazakh. So I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you. 大家早上好. Good morning, everyone. I'm from the family of China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. I'm very pleased to be here, and during the conference, there was a special day. 2 days ago, the April 24th was China Space Day. My motherland was celebrating this day in various ways, and so I propose that we celebrate this day with applause for China's achievements in space flight. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now let me share with you my points of current status of commercial aerospace development and the layout of our group company in commercial aerospace project and infrastructure. First, current situation and prospect of commercial space flight. 1. The number of active satellites continues to grow. Many enterprises have proposed the satellite constellation program. As of August 2018, the number of active satellites in space was 1,980, up 30.92% year-on-year. According to the United Nations Office for Space Affairs, the mass production of satellites and the emergence of low-cost launch scammers have greatly reduced the cost of satellite constellation construction. Companies led up by America's OneWeb and SpaceX have started to put forward and implement the huge satellite constellation play. 2. The global satellite industry booming, and the downstream industry has become the highland of value. Behind those huge satellite cluster projects, the steady growth of global satellite industry revenue in the past 10 years is supported. The average annual growth rate of satellite industry income reached 9.6%, of which satellite application service-oriented accounted for nearly half of the total revenue. The development focus of the satellite industry has been transferred from the upstream to the downstream of the industry chain. 3. The traditional industry information technology has an urgent need for satellite resources. We believe that this is driven by the current global industrial 4.0 transformation, such as intelligent network, intelligent agriculture, intelligent logistics, intelligent e-commerce, intelligent transportation. Those industries in the use of cloud computing, mobile internet, Internet of Things, and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence need that resources provided by the commercial satellite resources, products, and services to support. Second, commercial aerospace project of CASIC. CASIC is the most important force in China's aerospace industry. CASIC promoted the development of commercial aerospace, and several commercial aerospace projects and ground infrastructure service systems has been released, including 2 LEO satellite constellation projects, H-Cloud project, and X-Cloud project. Third, commercial aerospace ground infrastructure system based on Earth Plus in order to ensure the implementation and commercial operation of commercial aerospace projects based on the new generation of digital Earth service systems. We put forward the ground infrastructure system of commercial aerospace. Commercial aerospace ground service network we called OneWeb, and space-based network ground service platform we called One Platform, which are responsible for satellite measurement, operation and control, data transmission, and data application, and our center of ground infrastructure dominated by applications. The infrastructures are open satellite ground station service system, including TT and C Hall, ground station, and cloud-based service platform. We provide customers with satellite measurement and operation control tools based on cloud and web interface. Realize satellite that directly transfer to the client from ground station and quickly reach the user end. On the user side, cloud platform can provide data, applications, services, and other interfaces. Provide customers with cloud communications, cloud navigation, cloud remote sensing, cloud TT and C services. Users can directly access the processed satellite resources on the cloud, which makes the satellite resources easier to be used by general developers and enables industrial information enterprises to put research and development efforts in their specific business, saving the cost of learning and connecting satellite resources, applications, and services. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We also have one question from your side is, what is the most necessary means for the government to encourage the development of private space company? So the answer that's chosen from the audience is the first one, providing favorable regime and tax revenue and talent. So I think you agree this, yeah?
Okay, our answers is correct.
Yes, okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So we move to another continent right now, to the United States. That we have Lon Levin, who is the president and CEO of GeoShare.
Hello, everyone. Is it on? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Thank you, Cami, and also thank you to the conference for having this panel and all the other great panels. I want to talk about two models very quickly. You won't have to tell me to stop. It's two different models. One is a for-profit model, that's GeoShare, and then a not-for-profit model, which is the Milo Space Science Institute, both of which we are involved with. GeoShare is a separate subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary of Lockheed Martin Corporation, which has put an awful lot of things into space. But this is a separate startup. And the purpose of it, and also of Milo, is, I think, what the theme of this conference is, and that is how can we together have as many countries involved in space as possible. Both of these organizations are dedicated to that mission. GeoShare mostly focuses on communication satellites, geostationary satellites, but instead of just one owner, what it is we build condosats. And condosats, as many of you know, and if you don't, from the word condominium, they're satellites that are owned by more than one entity. And what we do, what GeoShare does all day, going throughout the world, is putting together as many countries, as many corporations, as many operators as together on one satellite to share the cost of the satellite, the launch, and the operation. This is what our job is. It's easy in concept, but it does take a lot of work. What we do is we provide delivery and orbit services. We help with the insurance and the financing. We bring customers if we can. We bring access to orbital locations, and we also provide training, which I know is very important, and also participation at all different levels, whether you want to buy a large part of the satellite or a small part of the satellite. Again, that's a for-profit company that tries to put together satellites. With regard to Milo Space Science Institute, that we work with our partner at Arizona State University, and it's housed in Arizona State University. This is an academic effort to bring as much compelling space science as possible to the world where the world can participate. The idea of it is not necessarily government to government, but can we have universities working together through the Milo Space Science Institute where they choose a very compelling space science project and then work together to actually launch and operate the project and bring great space science back to humanity. Right now, our first mission is a near-Earth asteroid mission where we will fly 6 spacecraft, flying by approximately 10 asteroids, and bring back the information. We are in discussions with many, many countries on many continents throughout the world. And I won't go into all those details, but just to understand what we see in the world is what this conference talked about. There are more and more space agencies. There are populations that want to be educated in space science, and it's critical for nations. Many nations are seeing that space is important to help educate their students. And there is more compelling space science that needs to get done that simply isn't getting done, and we are trying to answer that challenge by coming up with an institute that, again, we will, of course, have the blessings of our nation's space agencies. In fact, NASA is very supportive of what we do, but we don't look for money from NASA. We're trying to raise money and develop this through the university systems throughout the world. So that is it, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much. I think we also have a question. So your question to the audience is, what strengths should a country look for when deciding on foreign partners? So the answer is 46% of experience with knowledge transfer and teaching. You have some comment? Are you surprised?
Yes, I'm surprised. I'm surprised, and the reason why I'm surprised is because space is very hard, and I know that we all have bold ideas and very strong dreams, but it's hard, and you need to have the confidence that the technology is going to work. In fact, we were speaking with one country recently, and they said to us, yeah, but we were working with this group, and they kind of went away because they couldn't do it, and so that's critical. Secondly, financing. Space is expensive. The good news about space is getting less and less expensive. We can do more and more in space, but you need the financing. proven system integration, I understand that's kind of a vague or not an idea that you think about, but if you're going to work together, you have to have someone who can integrate all the different technology and the ideas so they can work together. Now, experience with knowledge transfer and teaching, absolutely, but that's what happens when you have great programs, and I think that that's what happens naturally if you do those other three things.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. So we have other speakers coming, another continent again, going closer from Europe. So we have Mr. Niels Eldering, Technology Transfer Officer from US Space Agency, ESA.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what I want to talk about is, first of all, maybe a little bit of definition. What do we mean with technology transfer as the European Space Agency? I also would like to tell you why we do it and why we see entrepreneurship as a vehicle to do technology transfer. And I would also talk a little bit about the power of entrepreneurship, because that's what we do. So first of all, when we speak, and when I speak, that's better, eh? About technology transfer, I'm really talking about non-space. So we're transferring either hardware or software from a space system into a non-space market application. I try to give some examples as we go. And at the same time, we also talk about downstream applications. So using space data, geopositioning data, Earth observation data for terrestrial businesses, so businesses down on Earth. So what's very important, I think, is that we understand that space fulfills that role as well, creating new business in all other markets except the space market itself. And I think that Professor Dr. Ehrenfreund really nailed it in her presentation when you were talking about technology transfer, startups and spin-offs, because I think without spin-offs you don't have spin-in, and without spin-in you don't have spin-off. So it all belongs together. In any case, why did we start to do technology transfer, and mainly also why did we start looking into business incubation centers? And as you can see on the view chart, we have grown dramatically over the last few years. So what we've saw that in the process of technology transfer, and of course there are companies and organizations who are very well equipped to go to the non-space market and show what you have on store. I think Cassia you're very capable of doing that, but in many cases it's not so clear where the challenges are in a non-space environment, on a production line or in the car manufacturing industry or wherever. And then as European Space Agency we help to matchmake, to broker a solution from space to an engineering problem or a service problem to non-space. But we saw towards 2000, the change of the millennium, that more and more entrepreneurs were taking up that challenge. They saw a business opportunity nobody else saw, and they saw space as a differentiator for their product or service. The challenge, of course, then is not so much the technological challenge anymore, because the technology is already developed in the space domain, but it's much more business challenge. You have to build a company, a vehicle to actually bring technology, software, or downstream application data into this different market environment. And as such, we started to engage in setting up business incubation centers. As you can see, we're currently spread out all over Europe. And that is because we do recognize the fact, like any other incubation center, that an incubation center is an indigenous regional economic development strategy. I cannot emphasize this more. It's about local entrepreneurship who have international aspirations, international product aspirations, but in the end, you look at local entrepreneurship. And why is this a strategy for regional economic development? Because I think it was around in the 70s. Instead of trying to find entrepreneurs from the other side of the planet, sometimes it's better to just look in your own backyard, in your economic backyard, so to say, and look at entrepreneurial talents which are around. And it's a matter of activating, of encouraging those talents to become entrepreneurial active and to start adding to the economy. So it's really about tapping into resources which are already there but have not been activated yet. And that's what business incubators do. So using this strategy for technology transfer means that all of a sudden in a given region You activate a lot of economic activity which pick up space technologies, software derived from space, and downstream data, and create new businesses. And why entrepreneurship? Because, as I said previously, entrepreneurs see opportunities where others don't see the opportunities. To give you an example, there's an interesting startup we've supported in our ISABIC in Bavaria, Building Radar. They analyze Earth observation pictures from all over the world, and they look for construction sites. And after a while, they can determine the rate and the progress of this construction. So you have independent data on when a building, more or less, will probably be finished. Now, who would be their main client? And instead of looking at typical government clients, okay, we can get a little bit more innovative, so maybe banking, real estate. They actually target office furniture companies, because these companies can then more timely bring an offer to the project developer, to the construction market. So it's a whole different client base they address we never thought about. So we believe that entrepreneurs can bring something to the table the established industry can't, because they look for a disruptive element in their product development. The space can give you that this disruption. And now coming back, of course, 1 minute, then coming back to, okay, why look in emerging countries? Because I believe emerging companies has a very high entrepreneurial potential. And that's also what my colleague, Mr. Voister-Büchel, yesterday stressed, that there are a lot of local entrepreneurial talents. I've been to South Africa recently, visiting DTI and Sansa. I met a lot of interesting entrepreneurs, very active with beautiful products. And all the way up north here in Morocco, 2 days ago, we visited with a small delegation Ben Guerir and the Mohammed VI University of Polytech. And we saw there also an incubator with students, and next door a coding school, really worthwhile to look at it, Ecole 1337, where you can see that higher education is combined with lower education in an entrepreneurial setting. So, to sum up, if we talk about space, we should also talk about downstream application and spin-offs, not only the spin-in discussion. And at the same time, we have to look at entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship can reap the benefits, whether it's space technology developed in your country or whether it's space technology developed in another place in the world. Your entrepreneurial community is capitalizing on it in your location, contributing to your economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we'd like to welcome Mr. Ben Besley-Walker, Partners and Global. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So my name's Ben, and I'm a partner at Andart Global, which is a small bespoke consulting firm that works on space and cyber issues. So we work with governments in developing international strategy and national strategy. We work with companies in building their growth paths in a lot of kind of the entrepreneurial ways that we've heard from some of my colleagues. And we also work with people investing in space and building investment strategies for government or private. So kind of with that bit of a broader flavor in mind, I thought I would make a few points. So firstly, we've heard a lot about why we can build a space industry from the government side or from the institutional side. The reality is, if you're a small space company that's just starting out, you have one of two realities that you're facing. One is that you're, as we heard from Agnieszka at Planet yesterday, you're solving a problem within your country. And actually space is not a particularly relevant part. It's just that space provides you a vehicle for solving a local or a national problem that you're trying to address. Second is you're building a space company. And as we all know now, the space market is fundamentally international. Especially if you're coming from an emerging country, you're unlikely to have a market nationally or indeed even regionally that will meet all of your needs. So when you're building a small space company, you're looking at a highly diverse base of global clients. Now, if that's the case, the question that I ask is, why would you choose a specific country to build your company in? So I think when we're looking at building and supporting a space industry base, we have to say, why are we attractive to any space company. Now, if you'll forgive me for being a little bit seditious, Niels, in a European context, there's huge amounts of value about being a European-flavored company, because you have ESA, who's a huge purchaser of small components, different technologies, different data streams. But the downside is that Europe is a hard place to start a business. Investment is difficult. There are a lot of barriers to entry. Now, if you look at the US, a very large market, a reasonably fluid capital pool to raise startup investment, but then you run into, especially if you're doing anything interesting in space, ITAR issues, who you can work with, who you can't work with very quickly. So if you're Botswana or Nepal or Laos, how do you start fostering a climate where your local engineers want to stay and can build a global business that is competitive with all of those other people in the market? So I think, to kind of build on what Pascal said, one of the key words is ecosystem. And it kind of ties together, I think, a lot of what we heard today. You need the policy and the government support to make sure that your small companies or your larger companies are able to have access to any kind of government solutions that are needed, but also can compete internationally. You need the business incubation element and the access to investment to allow you to grow, because space outside of the downstream flow gets very expensive if you're building hardware or trying to launch anything. And then lastly, you do need that human capital piece. The last point I would perhaps say is that often when we sit in the traditional space community, we really think about space as an exploration, as an interesting, inspiring sector. For me, when we work in a lot of developing countries and emerging space states, I kind of want it to be the opposite. I want it to be boring. I want it to be something which is just another resource that allows you to do interesting things in cost-effective, solution-oriented ways that allow you to address the national challenges or the economic challenges which you're faced with. So I think it's really important to really focus on what's looking into Earth and providing leapfrogging and quick solutions, rather than necessarily looking at things which are inspiring and building and looking out towards the moon or Mars or large space programs. If you want to get into space, you don't necessarily need to have space assets. You can buy data, and maybe actually if you buy it from somebody who's already built that network, it's cheaper and more effective, and you can focus on using that data in interesting ways. You can borrow assets, you can borrow capability. We're based in the UAE, and the recent the Arab Space Cooperation Pact is building knowledge and building a joint satellite in Dubai. Or lastly, if you really can't find something that is a solution, you can look at building it yourself. But for me, building things nationally is potentially the option of last resort. So thank you.
So thank you so much, Ben, for the sharing. So we would like to welcome Mr. Tobias Abbey, Major Astro Lithium Global. Thank you.
Thank you, Kami, and thank you to the organizer for having us here. It's a truly exciting event. So my name is Tobias Abbey, and I'm a manager at Arthur D. Little's Space Group. ADL was established in 1886, and this makes us the world's oldest management consulting firm. Our space legacy is actually dating back to the 1960s, when we were involved in the Apollo program. Today we are working both with commercial as well as public sector players. On the public side, we're working on very dedicated assignments such as socioeconomic impact assessments, but also working on like full-fledged programs such as setting up actually a space program in the first place, and thereby establishing a thriving space industry. But why is it relevant actually to have a thriving space industry? And here I would like to invite you actually to express your opinion in the poll question. I would like to answer rather the question basically, what do I need as a space industry player? What do I need from the government to come and participate in the space industry? And in our work, we have identified 8 building blocks that are required and that the government basically needs to provide to space industry players. You can see them behind me on the slide. We are quite a slide-heavy panel, I think, today compared to the last 2 days. But I will not bore you and go through all of these 8 building blocks individually, of course, because that will probably take me the whole day. And we have a very strict timekeeper today. I would rather select a few of them and highlight what could be the particularities for emerging countries and what do I need as a space industry player to actually participate in the space industry. So I think it all starts basically with receiving a signal from the government, a clear signal. What is the vision and the objectives of the space program? What should be achieved with the space program? And I think it was already mentioned over the last 2 days. This should be user-driven, this should be need-driven. It needs to be clear why a country needs to do space. We should not do just space for the sake of space, basically. So I really liked when, for example, Mr. Munsami said, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, how SANSA developed the space objectives of the South African space players. They went out and started to engage with local entities, government and commercial, to understand what can SANSA and what can space do for them. And like this, you can assure that basically the space sector has a purpose and will help to bring the country to the next level. But also, objectives can also be, of course, ambition-driven. I think that has not been mentioned that much in the last 2 days so far. Because, I mean, let's take, for example, Luxembourg. I'm not so sure whether right now, today, space resources are the top need of Luxembourg. But of course, it's an ambition, basically, to achieve the same as what Luxembourg already has achieved with the satellite communication industry. And the SATCOM industry is today representing like 2% of the annual GDP of the country. So as soon as I have basically defined these objectives, what do I want to achieve with the program, I need to clearly communicate them both to my national but also to the international space community and to the space industry. I can do that, for example, by communicating, creating a clear space policy. Another important point actually from a space policy is also defining what is the high-level sector governance. So what's my role as a private space sector company? And I think here, General Bolden made a very good point. And so when the US basically defined in 2010 their new national space policy, they made it very clear that the government players shall not compete with private sector players. And this is, of course, an extremely strong signal for me as a private sector player. So now as a private sector player, now that I know the focus of the space industry, and now that I know that I have actually a space in the local space industry, what else do I need to make the decision to actually come and participate in the space industry? I think I will require, of course, funding, infrastructure, regulation, and the right human capital. And here I think governments or space agencies play a key role to provide these and attract national and international space sector players to the sector. And I think it doesn't always need, of course, to be a space agency, but the government, especially in emerging countries, needs to assure to attract these players, because one of the key challenges, I think, to establishing a space program on the space industry is actually to localize the national space value chain. And for that, I need to attract, of course, both local and international players. How can I attract them?
Yes, 1 minute.
Okay. How can I attract them? I can attract them by providing funding, for example, going back again to Luxembourg. For example, Luxembourg has established their 100 million euro fund to provide funding to space mining and other space startups. Or I can also, of course, use other financial instruments. Another important way to attract is the regulation. I will not elaborate too much on this, but it just needs to be conducive. It needs to be in line with my objectives. However, once these space players have decided to participate in the space industry, I need to assure, or the government need to assure, that they can actually collaborate with each other. And I think many tools, of course, exist for that, but one very good tool for this, especially for emerging countries, is to establish a space cluster, such as the Aerospace Valley in France, for example. In this cluster, basically, I can assure the exchange between academia and the industry, and especially the national and the international industry. And thanks to this exchange, I will assure that the technology, as well as skills, are basically transferred between national and international players. Another important point in this space cluster example can be I can host a space incubator, a space accelerator to support my space startups to grow and become successful. Of course, none of this will be successful if I don't provide the right human capital. And I think, especially for emerging countries, this is a key role where government players can support. This needs to be done by developing a human capital development strategy that addresses really all age groups from preschool to on-the-job training, and it needs to be demand-oriented. It's very important to estimate basically what will be my required human capital and what will be my required degrees in order to avoid basically that supply and demand don't match. I think one good example also was provided yesterday by Mr. Ouattara, that many Earth observation specialists were actually trained in Ethiopia, but then once they graduated, they couldn't find a job in their assigned specialty. So they had to move to other industries and were therefore lost to the space industry. So for that reason, I think the role of the government is key, especially in emerging countries, when trying to develop a thriving space industry. But I'm sure that each emerging national space program can actually establish a thriving space sector, but it needs to be mindful about the building blocks that are shown here on the slide. And with that, I would like to complete my speech and would be happy to have a fruitful discussion later on. Thank you.
I think you have a question to ask to the audience as well. Your question is, what is the most important reason for emerging countries to develop a healthy private space sector? So the direct contribution to the economy have 54%. Are you surprised?
I'm a bit surprised that it's that clear. I'm not surprised that it's the leading answer, but I'm a bit surprised by the clarity of it. But I couldn't agree more that this is probably one of the key points why you're developing a space industry. But I think it's also important basically that this happens, of course, in collaboration with the national space agencies, with the national government, because in the end, it's the government or the space agencies that can also trailblaze basically the national space sector and help to establish these startups. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you so much. So we'd like to welcome our last panelist in this section, Professor Takayoshi Fukuyo, Associate Professor, Center for Spatial Information Science, University of Tokyo. Actually, Professor Fukuyo just arrived yesterday from Japan here, and he is leaving tomorrow, so we warmly welcome him from Tokyo.
Thank you, Kami, for kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fukuyo. I'm from the Center for Spatial Information Science of the University of Tokyo. The main task of our center is to develop innovative applications of space, not just space, and geospatial big data technologies for the benefits of the developing and the emerging countries, such as water resource management, agriculture, and, mining, and urban planning, and maritime surveillance, and so also infectious disease monitoring, like malaria and Ebola. So, but my work, not just the University of Tokyo, but also I'm working as an executive advisor of the National Space Policy of Japanese Cabinet Office to organize the promotion of Japanese space technology in emerging countries by combining the efforts of the academia, government, and private sectors. So we are also working together with the Intelligent Space Systems Laboratory of the University of Tokyo, the Professor Nakasuka's lab. I'm also the spin-off the new CubeSat company with the Professor Nakasuka. So with this team, we have the strong collaboration programs Asian and African countries for micro nano satellite development and also the downstream data analysis and utilization. We also working with this project with the emerging countries also by presenting the benefits of not just space technology, like I mentioned, but also geospatial big data by doing local capacity building programs on data analysis and utilization. So we have very good results with a successful collaboration in Asia and Africa and Middle East. And now I was working in the cabinet office to draft the basic space policy of Japan. With this policy, we have started a new program for promoting international business cooperation of involving the Japanese private sector and the academic sector, also the emerging countries, these sectors also. So then I now, for accelerating the materializing of these activities, I created new Space Age Activities Association and one startup, the Space Age Lab. So I'm now directly working in what we call the new space industries. So, and I think the most important aspect to successfully develop this startup is to know our partners and your partner very well. Because in the one example, our new program is now we are working together with Smart Africa and the Rwanda's government. Smart Africa is an initiative with 24 member country states, and not just government, also the ICT companies like Microsoft, Intel, and also the Carnegie Mellon University and our University of Tokyo, also the international organization like World Bank and ITU, African Unions. So this in our experience as we together starting now working with the Rwanda government. So the most important point is finding their competencies of the partners and demands, exactly know their exact demands and their capabilities. So in case of our project of Rwanda, we understood the country is very good for IT. So instead of focusing on the developing and the big space program with complex satellites, we decided to focus on downstream with innovative data analytics and utilizations. So we are now using not just space data, but also some ground sensors network data, and also the CDR, core detailed records, mobility, cell phones log data, combining it for the transportation management and urban planning. Also, we are now starting the infectious disease control monitoring. So, and for the space area, also we selected the CubeSat program with our experience with the Turicom 1R. This is just 3 kilogram CubeSat, which can gather the ground sensor data. So we starting from the capacity building to the manufacturing the CubeSat, and also from upstream to downstream to for solution of these technologies. So we are now starting with this Rwanda's project, explaining our challenges for all Africans, for Smart Africa. So we are now starting this project. So when what is important for our activity is the partnership. So I was worked in the university and the downstream areas, also the university and private sector. So now our Japanese companies also have the many list of the big provider to the small components providers also. So and some upstream to downstream. Our university and I, as an executive advisor for the National Space Policy Secretariat, I'm coordinating our challenges and efforts. So we are now have started in these new activities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all the panelists for your sharing. It's a back panel. We're a little bit one over time, but still I really like to have a panel discussion. I would like to do something that we have a question to the panelists, but I would also like the audience to participate. So I would like to put the question that I prepare to show here. And the question is, the core objective of this event aims at actively engaging emerging space program countries in the global space sector by highlighting the socio-economic benefit of the space application. So it is a question for the speaker here that, from your point of view, what is the main driver, or also inhibitor, to support the space industry development in a country? So anyone want to share? Would you like to?
Yeah, I think what is most important is to you can already get started, as already mentioned by various panel members. Space data is already available. You can already start building a user community. That's low-hanging fruit. So you can already get economically very active with space technology. Don't wait for an entire space industry to emerge. I mean, you have to work on that as well. But you can start now already with space applications. And I think that is very important to start with that from the get-go and not wait until you maturize the space industry as such.
I think it's especially sure that when you talk about the emerging space country, that they do not yet have the structure to put in place of every different industry have space expertise capability, because capability building is take times. So maybe it's also your opinion that you share.
Yeah, and if you activate local entrepreneurship to already reap the benefits from space developed wherever in the world, you can become very active, like we do with our incubation centers in Europe. You can do the same with incubation centers in Africa or elsewhere in the world.
Yes, thank you. Anyone? Yeah.
Oops. Yeah. I think I used this, it's too far away. No, I just summarized a little bit what the people, because I had time, what the people were saying. And when you also look at the list, which I think probably the others are seeing, what are the major drivers, you need all of them. Yeah, and that's, I think, that what the panel has proven also. It was very often mentioned human capital skills. This is some kind of the priority. This is something, the base which you need, and it's obviously. I think it was clear. You have to start with something, and you should not invest into this enormous roadmap when you want in an emerging country to start, but. You need some kind of a technology roadmap. You need then to make a national space program, define industry development framework, but I think it should be a stepwise approach, because otherwise you never, if you start to make a large program and then a long-term vision and so on, you are probably hampered by a lot of things. So that has to come. You need legislation and policy frameworks for the industrial development. As you explained, you need the commercial incentives in order to have high quality products, the tax regime environment, the disruptive element of incubators and innovation ecosystems, infrastructure, and in particular partnerships. And then comes the money. Yeah, I mean, the money is the most important thing. But this is a little bit what came out of all the discussion which I wrote down. And I think the partnerships are very important. And we have heard some examples of that. And it is not one answer to the drivers. You need many drivers, and you need them in a stepwise approach.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Ben.
I would completely agree with Pascal, and maybe even to add a little bit more on that. I think when countries are getting into space, there is no longer a space way of doing things. NASA is a terrible model. It's an incredibly large organization that has lots of organizational challenges, but also it came out of a history of needing to do everything itself. So a question that I would ask if I'm sitting in a government in a country that's looking to get into space is, where can we be unique in the industry? How can we build ourselves a national position that means that we contribute overall to the global space infrastructure and that gives us a unique contribution? One country that we've recently been working with just wants to be a space data hub. That's their main focus, and they want to be a global player for analyzed space data. Another country is looking simply on how can we use space as a cheaper way to solve our disaster management problems. And again, I would come back to that space piece. Often when you look at space, people use space because it's cheaper than doing it in a traditional way. If you can use, I don't know, Thailand is a good example on telehealth and teleeducation. You know, why build 50 schools if you can get the head of your most prestigious university to beam out a lecture via satellite to all of your rural educational establishments. So looking at how you use space as a economic leapfrog and also as a cost-effective solution, I think is really key, coupled with this idea of you don't have to do it all. You can just bring something to market which is a unique product, not only nationally, but also in the international community.
I would also like to ask Mr. Mabja, because you come from South Africa, so typically it's also emerging space country program. From your point of view, what is you see the driver and inhabitor here?
Okay, my point would be that I think all the elements that Pascal has mentioned are very much important. But over and above is the government's continuous commitment in ensuring that there is a space industry. We've all seen the past few days and heard that the space industry is very much capital intensive and requires huge investments. And without the support of government, in my mind, I'm thinking that it will not really happen. There's a need for government to really commit to make it a strategic direction that it requires the space, but not. I mean, to also be clear, why do we really need space? To see space helping us in solving the challenges that we have in emerging countries and in many other countries. So there's a need for government to intervene. There's a need for, as I've mentioned, for policies and strategies for governance framework to be laid down as a foundation. Thanks.
Thank you for the sharing. So I will conclude this panel with the answer from the audience as well, that you can see national space program development is the highest percentage, but I agree that, well, we can agree with what Pascal said, that all of that was the driver. We can consider the first driver, second, third, and the fourth one. So thank you so much for the panelists here, for the sharing, and thank you so much for all the audience to participating in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers, specifically also to Pascal for summarizing so well, and of course to Camille for moderating. Thank you very much. Maybe we give them another round of applause. Space industry development is a very important topic, and therefore I think we had to overrun a bit the time. That gives us the need to shorten the coffee break a bit, so I would ask you please use the time quickly to have a coffee break and try to be back at 11:30, 11:35, so that we can start more or less in time with the next panel that will be on legal and policy. Thank you.
Thank you. It is possible that we have a photo together?
Sure, okay.
Yeah.